The English consonant sounds that we saw in the first unit, the inventory of English sounds, is the basic set of consonants that are found in just about any variety. They're also the phonemes of individual varieties, and we'll talk about what we mean when we say phoneme in just a second. So we're going to now move on to consider the finer details of consonants, and we're going to see that the details can depend on the variety of English being spoken, the phonological context in which the consonant is found. And so that's when we're looking at allophonic variation, and also the social context in which an utterance is spoken. We're not going to speak so much about the social consonant context right now. We're going to focus on differences between varieties and things we see across phonological contexts. So we're going to start with number 2, phonological context, and define what we mean by phonemes and allophones with a case that's probably familiar to you from 201 or any other exposure to the notion of phonemes. So we have both aspirated and unaspirated voiceless stops in English. So examples of aspirated stops are shown in the first set. So party, punch, peach, teach, touch, time, keep, cut, cat. And if you're wearing a mask, you should be able to feel puffs of air when you say party, punch in your mask, or if you put your hand up, party, punch, and so on. The second group are unaspirated voiceless stops. And sometimes you'll get some kind of release in the final consonants, which is something like aspiration. But in general, these are unaspirated stops. So cup, lip, kept, ripped, spit, happy, happy, happy. And if you compare happy to peach, you should be able to notice a big difference in whether there's aspiration on the P sound in the two. So the phonetic details of the consonants here. So these are all voiceless stops, and we didn't talk about aspiration before. And we could just say that in this case, voiceless stops are aspirated word initially and are maybe unaspirated elsewhere, with the exception, again, of sometimes the final release in stops. Now, we'll elaborate on this phonological context later because it is more complicated than that in English. So we've now discussed 3 types of stop in English: badaga, pataka, and pataka. In English, voicing and aspiration are different in terms of their predictability. So aspiration, as we've just seen, is predictable in English. We can say whether a voiceless stop is going to be aspirated or unaspirated based on its phonological context. Voicing is not predictable in English. So voiced and voiceless stops can occur in the same phonological context. Both can appear word initially, word finally, and so on. So we get these minimal pairs: bat versus pat, to versus do, cap versus gap, tab versus tap, bid versus bit, log versus log. You can't get minimal pairs for voiceless unaspirated and aspirated stops because you can't get an unaspirated stop and an aspirated stop in the same phonological context, because they can't say both appear word initially because the unaspirated stops are banned there. Therefore, we can't get a contrast in word initial position between these two. They can't both appear word finally because the aspirated stop doesn't appear there. Although it may appear as a variant, and we'll talk about what it means to be a variant in just a second. The converse of predictability is contrastiveness. So since the difference in voicing can contrast 2 different words, we can say that voicing is a contrastive feature in English. Voicing is contrastive in English, aspiration is not. So predictable distribution and contrast are what defines the difference between sounds that are called phonemes now and allophones. Phonemes are two sounds that can occur in the same phonological context and can form minimal pairs. That is, that they're contrastive. Now, an important part of the definition that we haven't talked about yet is that they can form minimal pairs, right? And what that means is that they can lead to meaning difference. So think about two sounds in variation. Now, we haven't really talked about this term. You might not have even talked about it in 201 when you took it. Variants are two sounds that can occur in the same position of the same word spoken by the same speaker over different speaking occasions. So the example I'll use here is the the. So we've talked a little bit about how the phoneme is sometimes realized as duh. And for a lot of speakers in general American English, African American English, many varieties, they'll sometimes use duh in the first consonant of they. And it'll happen with different frequencies across speakers. But if you're using both the and duh in they, you've got the same sound in the same phonological environment, but you're not getting a meaning difference. It's not two different words, it's the same words. So the difference between the and duh here is not contrastive. So we've got phonemes and variants that occur in the same phonological environment. Phonemes are the ones that can make a difference in meaning. Allophones are sounds that cannot occur in the same phonological context, like voiceless unaspirated and voiceless aspirated stops in English. That means the distribution of the sounds is predictable. One sound appears in one set of environments, the other sound appears in another set. And another important part of this definition is that they're phonetically similar. So think about that for a second. Could you think of two sounds that never appear in the same phonological environment, but are not allophones because they're not phonetically similar? And the answer is right here, that we would want to say that ta and ta are allophones, but not ta and pa or ha and engma. So ha never appears in the final position of the word in English, only in initial position, whereas engma only appears in final position. But we don't call them allophones because they're not phonetically similar. An important point of transcription practice here is that we use square brackets for the allophones and slashes for the phonemes. So these are the allophones of pa. These are variants for an underlying the, for a speaker who has both of them in the same environment. Okay, the rest of this web page consists of a group exercise for the second week of this Unit 2. So for next week, if you're watching this in week 1, we're going to work more on stop allophony and get kind of into the nitty-gritty of English stop allophony or allophony. I think if you ask any pair of phonologists, you'll usually get a different answer, whether it's allophony or allophony. I think I kind of like allophony better, so I'll go with that.